I am very honored to introduce our final keynote speaker of CXO 2020. He has led 200 corporate and developmental sustainability engagements across Southeast Asia. Andrew Chan is a key figure in developing the corporate sustainability agenda across the region, and he currently leads sustainability and climate change practice in PwC's Southeast Asian Consulting Services. To end CXO 2020 on a high note, Andrew will share with us how by adopting sustainability, it has enabled businesses to innovate their products and services, value chain and operation models, and in the process, increased business value to its owners and to society. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker, Andrew Chan.
Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be with you. Thank you, Myra, for the kind introductions, and congratulations to the staff for organizing this conference. This certainly is a new experience for me, doing this digitally as well, but we're always willing to learn new things. So what I wanted to share with you was just some initial views around how innovation and the sustainability agenda link together. And this is more to teeing up the conversation that we have shortly with our panelists. So again, if you have questions that, whether directly for myself or for our panelists that arise from some of the ideas that I'm sharing with you now, feel free to log those on in the questions, and we'll get to them as best we can once we get to the panel session. So just to start off with sustainability, a lot of has been talked about sustainability over the past decade or more in Malaysia. And what we're seeing increasingly are companies coming out innovating around sustainable products and services. Some global examples to start with. For example, Clorox, existing brand, very well established, but decided to launch a new sub-brand called Greenworks to capture the emerging market that wanted more sustainable chemicals, chemical-free into their cleaning products. Generated an awful lot of revenue for Clorox and actually helped revive the company more. As we all know, electric cars, for example, Tesla, new entrant into the space. So it's not just about innovating existing businesses, but potential for creating new sectors. And we also here talk about potentially the third national car in Malaysia, which would be creating new sub-industries for Malaysia as well. However, it's not all rosy. Sustainability has positives, but it also has negatives and pressures that are put onto companies. For example, extra scrutiny around labor standards, environmental performance. Investors and finance providers are increasingly looking at companies and how are they impacting the environment and the society around them as well. So innovation can come in the form of looking for business enhancements or differentiation, but also protecting the business as well. And what is driving all these changes? In PwC, we use a framework called ADAPT. And ADAPT basically captures some of the key megatrends globally, talking about asymmetry in the world, talking about disruption, the age demographics, polarization, whether it's north-south, whether it's rural-urban, but increasing polarization, and the trust agenda. These are five big forces that we feel are shaping the world as we know it today. And these map very closely onto sustainability, where typically we look at environmental issues, we look at social issues, and we look at governance issues, which you could say then maps to trust. Social issues very clearly highlighted through asymmetry, age, and then we see disruption coming through not only in the environment space, but also polarization is impacting. So why do companies respond to the sustainability agenda? So typically we see this maturity that companies follow. It's by no means linear, but again, typical evolution. We see companies responding first to sustainability from a compliance and a risk basis. Especially us in Southeast Asia, I think we're a very compliant bunch. So if the regulator tells us we need to do something, we do it. So typically that's the response we have first from companies, is responding to compliance requirements. And that is protecting the company, it's protecting the brand, and it's protecting you from potential fines and damage to reputation. Additionally, though, to highlight where you actually do manage your risks better, some companies are increasingly accessing lower cost of capital. So finance providers are increasingly looking at environmental and social performance of the companies that they're lending to or investing in, and giving better rates to those that are more sustainable. They perceive those more sustainable companies to be lower risk in their portfolio. The next stage of evolution is typically operational effectiveness, so where companies are looking at cost savings. This could be in the form of, for example, reduced energy usage. It could be in the form of reduced wastage of raw materials, reduction in disposal costs. So we like to help our clients move very quickly to operational effectiveness because it helps generate savings, and the ROI is typically fairly quick. And then we move into strategic advantage, where, as you've seen from some of the examples I highlighted, you can get into product innovation, you can get into service innovation, you can further differentiate your brand, you can open up new customer channels and attract different audience that you may not have thought of before. So sustainability, one of the telecommunications companies in South Korea, for example, when it applied the mega trends, so for example, they were looking at age and the aging population in Korea, they thought, hold on, there is no one who actually has a telco service product specifically for the aged population. We typically have the youth market, we have the business market, but we don't have the aged market. So they actually came up with a specific product targeted at the aged population, and did very well. I think they called it the Silverhead program. So just moving on to local examples, how have we seen companies locally respond? Well, I have to say congratulations to Malaysia, where we're not laggards in this area. We're holding our own by also innovating when it comes to sustainability responses. For example, one of the property developers looked at, again, the aging trend, but also how do Malaysians as a society live and network with each other. We tend to look after our parents, our grandparents, etc. So looking at this trend, this property developer said, actually, we'll put ensuite rooms for parents if they want to move in with their children, so that we don't have to go through the expense of installing elevators. So it makes it more accessible. Let's build that into the design phase so that, again, your aging parents don't have to negotiate flights of stairs. They're on the ground floor and they still have their private area. In terms of a new business setup, we've seen social enterprises increase in Malaysia. For example, there are many dealing with trying to preserve the heritage and culture, especially of our indigenous and rural population and the handicrafts. And some of those are actually doing very, very well and recognized in global circles. From a government perspective, we've also seen innovation, for example, green technology and green technology financing. The government issued incentives to stimulate the growth of the green technology sector and put in place financing mechanisms to encourage the growth of that sector. So just to highlight, the response can be at the corporate level, but the response can also be at the government public sector level as well. And what does this really mean for companies when we talk about responding, when we talk about innovating? So yes, you may be able to come up with additional products, but what does that really mean for you as a company? Well, I mentioned to you earlier that finance providers are increasingly looking at sustainable traits and how are you performing. Let's look at why that's the case. So highlighted here on the left side, you see some analysis over a 40-year period of the S&P 500 market value. And 40 years ago, you can see the value of the S&P 500, over 80% was made up of tangible assets. So buildings, machinery, and equipment, but things that you would see sitting on your balance sheet. But fast forward to 40 years' time, that ratio has flipped. So now over 80% of value of S&P 500 is from intangibles. And what makes up intangibles? Well, brand is a big component of that, but also quality of governance, employee engagement, customer satisfaction, environmental performance, community relationships, health and safety performance. So you can see a lot of factors are now going into what we call intangible. And this is why there's increasing focus on disclosures when it comes to sustainability, because they're seen to impact the value of a company. So whether you're an investor trying to seek better returns, as illustrated by the chart on the right, which is from Bursa FTSE for Good, you can see that the sustainability index outperformed by 4%. So whether you're an investor seeking better returns or you're a bank and lending money and looking to protect the risk to your loan book more, sustainability performance is increasingly relevant. Okay. And how do you go about responding to sustainability? So it's all very nice saying, yes, you can innovate, but we all know that innovation is not necessarily easy to do, and you need to have a formal process and system in place to encourage good innovation in the company and not leave it to chance. But how do you respond to sustainability in a more structured manner to be able to engage, whether it's investors or other finance providers or even your broader stakeholders? Well, we use a very simple framework to help guide responses by companies. We talk about the linkage between your sustainability strategy and your corporate strategy. Increasingly, companies are developing a sustainability strategy that supports their corporate strategy. But what we're seeing leading edge companies do is say, actually, there is no difference between a corporate strategy and a sustainability strategy. It is one strategy about value creation. So some companies that we're working with across the Southeast Asia region are already looking from that perspective to say, it is one strategy to do with how do I create value overall. And it's not necessarily a profit maximization strategy, but they're looking at a value optimization strategy. So how do we deliver good sustained benefits, not only to our shareholders and investors, but also in balance with environmental and social returns as well. And then once you've defined that strategy, you can look at the sustainability initiatives that you have in place. Do they support the delivery of your sustainability strategy? What we find across this Southeast Asia region is that we have a lot of initiatives already when it comes to sustainability, but a lot of that is what we would call the CSR or the philanthropy space. It is contributing potentially to environmental initiatives or communities, but it's more to do with giving money or giving assistance without really linking back into the business strategy. So that's actually the differentiation. We talk about sustainability versus CSR or philanthropy. Sustainability actually links back to the business outcomes as well as delivering environmental and social returns. And to manage all this constructively, do you have a robust set of sustainability measures? These are relevant not only to measure the performance that you have and are you addressing the strategy that you focused on, but these are the metrics typically that your finance providers, that your additional stakeholders, whether it's NGOs or potential employees or business partners, want to look at some of your metrics to understand how are you really performing. Now these metrics, just to highlight to you, again, the basic level of metrics is just talking about the inputs and the outputs. So how much money are we spending or how much time are we spending? What resource are we donating? Those are typically what we'd call inputs. Outputs would be directly what is the input used for? So are we contributing to 5 schools, for example? Are we contributing to buying more energy efficient equipment? So that's what we would call output. But again, the trend increasingly by stakeholders, they want to see what is the impact of doing this. Okay, so if you're donating money to schools, well, what is the impact of that? Yes, you said you've covered 10 schools, but what has that enabled the schools to do? What has it impacted the school children? Does it mean the average grades are better? Does it mean there's more moving on to tertiary education? So impact measurement is the increasing trend as well, that stakeholders increasingly want to see companies disclosing that. And then we look at how do you structure your company to support the delivery of your strategy and management of the sustainability agenda overall. So this encompasses the governance structure in your organization. Do you have a dedicated person or do you have a dedicated role looking at sustainability and implementing it across the organization? What is the reporting line? Does this go up to the board? Is there a terms of reference for the board to say formally that the board should be looking at and managing sustainability as well? People, do you have the right capability in the organization? Do you have training, education programs? Should you be reaching out to your key suppliers and business partners to also educate them around what you've committed to and how they can support you to deliver the outcomes? Again, as we get into more and more complex issues, as you can see from the ADAPT framework, it is more than just one single company, one single government can solve by themselves. There is a strong encouragement to actually partner to deliver meaningful impacts. And then at the end of the day, when you capture all this information, stakeholders want to see the information. So how are you reporting? How are you structuring your report? And how are you highlighting that the data that you're sharing is accurate, trustworthy? So where does the role of potentially your internal audit team or even a third-party assurance provider? It may not be an auditor. It could also be the community themselves confirming that you have provided support to them. It could be an NGO verifying that you've been working with them to deliver on certain environmental issues as well. So how do you give assurance and comfort that the data that you're presenting is actually accurate and verified? So that's a fairly simple framework. It can be used as a checklist to say, do we have these things in place? And although I started at the top and worked down, by no means do you have to start at the top. You can start at the bottom, you can start at the middle. There is actually no right or wrong answer. This is actually just a holistic framework for you to consider, are we managing our sustainability response holistically? And putting this framework in place also gives you more ability to proactively manage the innovation process when it comes to dealing with sustainability impacts and the responses that you have. And just to leave you with a few final thoughts, I've been doing sustainability for a long time. I set up the sustainability practice in PwC for the Southeast Asia region around about 2007. And this is a journey we've all come on together, but we hear constant concerns, what I would call myths around sustainability. One of those is that sustainability actually costs me money. We would like to debunk that. We actually say sustainability actually saves you money, because if you remember my three-phase diagram talking about compliance, operational efficiency, and revenue or differentiation, these are all about value adding to the company. Now, in terms of a cash flow, maybe there's some upfront investment, but the return is fairly quick. So sustainability as a whole should not be costing you more money, but it should actually be able to generate better returns to your company. Again, which is why investors, finance providers are looking at sustainability performance to assess whether it's your credit rating or whether to assess how much they think your business performance can actually increase. So that also links to the second point to say investors and customers are not interested. Why should we respond to sustainability unless the regulators tell us we need to? Hopefully you stay on for our panel session later. We have Luan from CIMB who can share the finance provider perspective, but also our other panelists from Holstein Milk Company and Sime Darby Plantation can also share what are they hearing from investors and finance providers. And they'll share that increasingly they're asking for sustainability data before they decide to unlock the financing. And then the final one is that actually we need sustainability specialists to respond, and there's not many in the country, let alone Southeast Asia region. That is a correct point. It is an area where more and more people are getting interested and getting themselves educated to support and help respond on sustainability. However, there are a lot of guidelines out there on sustainability, and the good news is pretty much most of those guidelines are free. So Bursa Malaysia has guidelines for listed companies, which non-listed companies can also use to respond on sustainability. That leverages what we call the GRI framework. On climate change and carbon, there's the Carbon Disclosure Project. There's also now the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures that Bank Negara and Securities Commission have given their commitment that the financial system should be implementing in Malaysia. Then we have the Sustainable Development Goals, of which the ministry hosted our first Sustainable Development Goals convention from the government, I think in November last year. So a lot of frameworks out there to guide you, and they give you step-by-step guidance and approach on how to respond. And of course, if you need to ask a specialist, there are specialists in the market, not only from my team, but from other organizations who would be happy to share perspectives with you as well. Okay, so it is an education process, but you need to start somewhere, and the good news is that there's lots of guidance to help you on this journey. And those are the key points I wanted to share with you for now, and happy to take some questions if there are some questions. Otherwise, we'll address more at the panel. Myra?
Hi, thank you, Andrew. That's interesting. I was listening to your talk, and it sounds like sustainability is also long-term efficiency for the company. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but before that, we have a few questions for you. We have 4 questions for you. The first is from Michael. How does one forecast/predict a sustainable innovation model? Surely it is not just limited to measuring sustainability by just financial return, although this seems to be the only key index seen. That's a really good question.
So if I understand the question, I would frame it around the types of metrics that we're looking at. So for a company, again, you need to understand and define what is it that you're trying to achieve as a company. A lot of discussions I have with board members nowadays is that actually you were not set up as a company just to deliver profit. There is a reason the company was set up, and we call that the purpose of the company. So what are the metrics around the purpose of a company? And traditional financial focus has obviously led to that being very focused on profit generation by a company. Not wrong, but we feel there should be additional metrics to say, well, really, what are the metrics to measure your purpose? There may be a bunch around social impact. So pretty much every company out there does an employee engagement survey now. Why do you do that? Is it just to see if your employees are happy? Are they engaged? Well, actually, that also links into financial return. More engaged employees generate better innovation, they generate better customer service, they collaborate better with each other, you have less cost from absenteeism, etc. So what are the right metrics that you should be thinking about as an organization beyond just traditional financial metrics to measure the overall health of the company? So I'm not sure if that answers you directly, Michael, but I see it just as a framework about measuring overall company performance, and agree it's not just financial return.
Thank you, Andrew. I think there is a lot of questions and a lot of struggles surrounding impact management, be it whether whether it comes to sustainability or whether it comes to other things. But I think what you said about knowing your purpose and knowing what you want to be a metric was a really good response. Thank you so much. We have another question from Frankie. Sustainability tries to secure present needs without compromising the future generations. How? Without giving up any of the three essential pillars: environmental protection, social development, and economic growth. It's a loaded question. What do you think, Andrew?
It's actually a very good question. And this is why sustainability can get quite complicated, and why you need multiple stakeholders to help address this issue, not just the corporate side, but the public sector and NGOs to come in to share their views. And this is where I talk about the paradigm shift from profit maximization to value optimization. Because if you're in a value optimization lens, yes, it helps you balance financial return, environmental impact, and social impact. And by doing that, it leads to more sustained longer-term performance. So that's where your point about future generations come in. It's very much about creating the right balance. For companies that are very aggressive on a profit-taking perspective, we've seen from the average age of companies on stock exchanges now, the average age of companies has been coming down significantly. The number of companies that are 100 plus years old has dropped remarkably, and we have much younger companies now. So what happened to those older companies that went out of business? A lot of research will point to the fact that the focus that they had was very much on shorter term focus, profit taking. Again, a company does need to deliver financial returns, but our view is if you have been set up with a longer term mandate and your customer needs are still relevant 10, 20, 30 years in the future, there is still a reason for your business still to survive. But to get to 30 years, 40, 50 years down the road, you need to balance how you also deal with your environmental resources and social resources. You know, we all know that the cost of energy is potentially going to increase. The cost of water is heavily subsidized. How long can governments continue subsidizing that? Well, that needs to stimulate companies to think, what else can we do in our business model to manage those potentially escalating costs, which are to do with natural resource availability of human capital as well. Okay, so very complicated question, Frankie, but a good debate.
Perhaps we can address it later. It'll come up in the panel session later. Frankie, you should stay tuned. So, we have another question from Charmaine. Thank you so much. Charmaine's been asking a lot of questions for the past 4 days, so I'm just going to give a clap to that. So his question is, I understand the actual meaning of sustainability to corporates. It's more to like an IT company designing a product to enhance the school's technology rather than giving money to the school. So I think it's a point of clarification.
Yeah, good point, Charmaine. I'm glad you internalized that. I would say that there's actually nothing wrong about giving money to a school as part of a broader sustainability program, but that portion we would call more philanthropy. So you're correct in how you're positioning this. A company that is doing sustainability will be able to look at its own business model and say, what resources and expertise do we have to be able to also deliver positive social or environmental outcomes and have it also benefit us financially. So if I extend your example and say, where is the impact back to the company? For example, is it around the branding where more children are exposed to, okay, this is a company that actually engages with our community proactively and look at that positively? Or is it, for example, to do with saying that the IT company wants more IT skilled resources in the country and it doesn't have a specific type of that resource, and they're donating technology and potentially access to materials that help that capability develop in the country, such that that IT company then 15, 20 years down the line has access to the right capability to further grow its company.
Thank you, Andrew. We have two more questions. Sorry, we have two more questions. This one's from Ellen. What is the biggest change observed in businesses in terms of their sustainability practices pre and post COVID-19, or was there no change at all? It's a good question.
Good question. This is I guess it's still fairly fresh. We're still dealing with the COVID-19 situation. I say typically in crisis, we've done research on this not too long ago. I think my Australian colleagues looked at the whole NGO sector and donations to the NGO sector, and we found that in terms of financial crisis or crisis overall, donations to NGOs, charities are one of the first things to go, not just by companies, but also from citizens themselves. So that's something typically we see drop immediately is discretionary spend. The other impact obviously is the kind of lockdown work from home mode, so the ability to actively provide physical support to communities, deliver on environmental commitments, etc., has been limited. But if we talk about things where it's internalized in the company, whether it's things like energy efficiency, resource usage, how they're dealing with their own human capital, those are things that have continued, although obviously manufacturing, etc., has been on a smaller scale. But the big uptake that we've seen is a more conscious focus on wellness. And that links very much into the social dimension of sustainability when we talk about environment, social, and governance. So one economist has called this the kindness economy, which I like a lot, about being much more mindful to each other, also to your business partners. There are companies out there, there are SMEs that say, actually, we are not getting revenue coming in, so we can't afford to pay these invoices. And many of the larger companies are actually giving them delayed payment terms to help them out. And not only that, they're actually going proactively to engage with those companies and say, okay, businesses are starting to restart. What are the kind of joint projects we can work on together to actually help you get back on your feet? So that's something I think is a big positive, is the kindness economy and being much more mindful to each other. That does link back to the sustainability agenda, and it's about mutual benefit and value generation as opposed to the kill the competition philosophy.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. I think when everybody is drowning, when we know what it feels like when we're drowning, we try to help other people who are drowning as well. It's beautiful. We have a last question from Chathiya. Are Malaysian conglomerates reducing carbon footprints of businesses through increasing carbon credits? It's a very good question.
So carbon credits, we've been in a funny stage, right? We had a carbon credit market. It absolutely tanked. But we're seeing some pickup in it again. For example, in Singapore, they've put a price on carbon. that will obviously flow into the balance sheets of companies. So I am all for financial mechanisms because there should be a price to natural resources that we use. But carbon markets itself has been quite fickle so far. But there are positive signs as well of green shoots. For example, there was the SAREF conference in Sarawak in December, where Sarawak Energy announced its green energy credits, where companies could actually buy the green energy credits to offset. But just on the point of carbon credits as well, it is one part of the solution. The other part of the solution is actually reducing your carbon footprint. There will not be enough carbon credits in this world if everyone wants to continue the growth at all costs philosophy. It just doesn't exist, right? We don't have enough carbon credits and carbon sinks. So it's a two-stage response. There should be reduction of your environmental footprint. And then the areas you cannot reduce, that's when you look for the offset initiatives.
Thank you so much. It was a very cheeky question, Chathiya, because there's been a lot of debate and chatter around carbon credits as well. But thank you so much to all of the, for everybody who's given the really, really good questions. I think that was a really, really good set. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your answers. And I'll be there later to introduce the rest of the speakers. In the meantime, I'm signing out from here.